There's a way out of this, okay?
We are talking Twisted Metal. This is a season 1 review of the new show from the streaming service Peacock, a 10 episode season 1 based on a video game from the Sony PlayStation. Now, I actually used to work in the game industry when this kind of original game actually came out on the PlayStation. It was one of my favourite games on the system, and I really kind of quite enjoyed that and its kind of first sequel. I've stopped playing video games for a long time now, so I haven't sort of kept up with it. But when the original one came out, it was one of my kind of like go-to games for a bit of a laugh. So I was quite keen to check this kind of series out because I am somewhat familiar with the kind of the source material and did quite enjoy the characters and the world. Now, how do you kind of make a tournament-based vehicular combat game as a kind of series? Well, essentially, this series stars Anthony Mackie, you've got Stephanie Beatrice, Neve Campbell, Thomas Hayden Church, I think it is. And it's essentially a post-apocalyptic world. And in this world, there's been some type of a apocalyptic event, and the world is kind of like your Mad Max kind of style wasteland now. And what we have is a little bit like Judge Dredd. We have these kind of walled cities, and that's where the kind of the elites are kind of living. And the rest of the kind of the world is ultimately kind of a wasteland now. And we have these kind of couriers that go between cities to kind of deliver stuff, and they're called milkmen. And Anthony Mackie's character John Doe is one of these milkmen. He's a guy who can't remember his past to kind of a certain point in his life, doesn't even know his real name, so he just calls himself John Doe. So he meets up with another character called Quiet, played by Stephanie Beatrice, who you may know from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and together they kind of team up to deliver, or actually to pick up a package from across the country, sent on a mission by Neve Campbell's character, with the reward being, John can live in this kind of like walled city, safe from, essentially the kind of the world outside. So they have to travel across country to pick up this package, drive it back, and avoid all the kind of the terror and danger that lurks between that trip, basically. Now, what will happen? You'll have to watch the series to find out. So, what do we think of Twisted Metal? Now, obviously, we've come off the back of a very highly regarded video game series in The Last of Us. This one isn't like that. It's a very different tone. This is a very kind of tongue-in-cheek, surfacey level kind of like action show. Certainly more, I think, aimed at a younger audience than The Last of Us. More kind of action and kind of humour based rather than the kind of the more deeper world building and kind of character work than The Last of Us. So it's very, it's not like an apples for apples comparison. What can I say that I liked, however? I mean, Anthony Mackie, who you may know, who played obviously the Falcon in the kind of the MCU, is a very likeable actor with a really great charisma, both in his kind of real life and if you look at it in interviews and stuff, and his characters, he injects that into his characters. And that's true of his portrayal of this kind of John Doe character. Very kind of likeable, affable, kind of like protagonist who's easy to kind of root for. He has some pretty funny moments. He has a kind of very likeable personality. There are a couple of dramatic moments I feel that, maybe don't work as well. But, it's not terrible, and fairly good at the kind of the action kind of stuff as well. I really adore this world, this kind of post-apocalyptic world with all these kind of crazy characters. And we do get characters from the game show up. They're of variable kind of like, recognition, I suppose. I mean, some of them are quite from the game, very much like the characters from the game. Others have been changed, others are kind of missing entirely. I think probably the standout for most people, or probably the most recognisable character from the game, is Sweet Tooth, who is this kind of killer clown who drives a kind of an ice cream truck. And he's a major supporting character. He's probably in about half the episodes, and he has his kind of own story that kind of goes through the kind of the show. And he's very much played here as a kind of an anti-hero, but still having a kind of edge to him where he's He's not a good guy. He's very much a kind of a psychopath who can kind of turn on a dime. But ultimately, his story kind of puts him at odds with our main protagonist, this kind of mall cop who's now the kind of essentially the head of this kind of makeshift kind of police unit. And, you know, he's our kind of primarily our bad guy, I suppose. And, you know, he has kind of a score to settle with Stephanie Beatrice's character. And we have a smattering of other kind of characters who you'll know from the kind of the game as well. So, you know, it tries to stick to the kind of the characters and build out the kind of the world. Now, if you're familiar with the kind of the characters from the game, obviously there are changes here, but it has to be to make it more of a coherent story, I suppose. So I don't necessarily hold too much of an issue with that. The series is action-packed. There's not all that much vehicular combat as you'd probably expect, considering the source material. But there are a decent amount of kind of like fist fights and things like that, and shootouts and bits and pieces like that. So even though this series doesn't have as much vehicular combat as maybe you would expect, there's still quite a lot of kind of action kind of set pieces, and you know, there's quite a lot of variety in the kind of the episodes as well. The episodes only run about 30 minutes apart from the pilot, which is a little longer, so they're kind of quite digestible and things like this. And as I say, we are introduced to different characters in a lot of these episodes, so different locations, so we get a good variety of the kind of the locations and kind of themes to these episodes, so they do feel quite different from each other. It looks like it has a reasonable amount of money spent behind it. I mean, I don't think it's kind of HBO, you know, Game of Thrones, The Last of Us kind of style budgets here, but nonetheless I do feel the production value looks pretty good. There's lots of kind of external shooting involved. The VFX look pretty good. There's lots of kind of practical kind of stunt work, many extras, lots of kind of like carnage and stuff, and this kind of apocalyptic world I think is quite well realised, and its denizens are quite kind of fun and interesting. And this series definitely has more of a fun element. It's not one that takes itself too seriously. It is a kind of tongue-in-cheek series, kind of like the game. I mean, the game is a little out there, if we're honest. The concept isn't particularly a serious concept, and that I think that show kind of reflects the game as much as maybe it possibly could, without kind of just being a tournament, which maybe it looks like season 2, maybe more like that. So, you know, it's fun. It's fun. It kind of aims at a younger audience. I maybe feel people who want a bit more mature content, and I don't mean bloody or sex stuff. I just mean mature themes may feel this kind of series is a little bit juvenile, which brings me on to what I think maybe doesn't work. But I think the tone of this show won't be for everyone. Like I said, it's very kind of zany. It's very kind of silly. It has very little, I feel, character work on it. It's much more about like wham, bam, like flashy visuals and kind of like minimal kind of character building here, and things like this are kind of probably the most time we spend is between the Anthony Mackie character and the Stephanie Beatrice character, and they argue a lot. I would argue they argue a little bit too much, and it becomes a little bit annoying at times. I've got to be honest with you, I don't think they had the best chemistry. I mean, as I've mentioned, I think Anthony Mackie is quite a personable character, personable actor, personable, you know, just person, and his characters always kind of seem similar to a degree. But I just don't know if I felt that these two characters particularly gel all that much. Maybe towards the end of the series, a bit more, but certainly the kind of the first 2/3 of this kind of series, I wasn't really feeling a hell of a lot of chemistry between them. I mean, we spent a lot of time with them, so they kind of, you know, you kind of put the bonds together yourself, and the show is trying to kind of, you know, make these two like this kind of like will they, won't they kind of couple. But I don't know, I just wasn't quite feeling the kind of the chemistry between the two actors, and they spent a little bit too much time kind of arguing, because they argue a lot. I feel this series is maybe guilty of a similar thing that The Mandalorian is guilty of, and that is this has a lot of side missions. So the premise of the show is for Anthony Mackie's character to go from one part of the country to another, pick something up and bring it back. And along the way, he meets various characters and goes on lots of kind of side missions that kind of are wrapped up by the episode. So it ends up feeling a little bit more like episodic and like, oh my god, you know, another side mission. A little bit like The Mandalorian, if you've ever watched that show. So there is a degree of that. As I mentioned, I feel probably the most recognisable character in Twisted Metal is the character of Sweet Tooth, who does get quite a lot of screen time being a supporting character, but I have to be honest, his arc goes really nowhere, to be honest with you. It's just, I feel like it's just having him on screen because he's the kind of the face of the franchise, so to speak, but I don't really feel like his story arc really went anywhere, and I mean literally, it kind of has no real repercussions on the kind of the story at large, if I'm honest. So he's just kind of shows up and does his own thing, but it has really no impact on anything at the end of the day. So I thought he wasn't well integrated into the kind of the story as much as he maybe could have been. I feel what the better option might have been is to have different perspectives from different kind of characters and drivers and stuff, but we really just do focus on the you know, our two main protagonists, Anthony Mackie and Stephanie Beatrice, rather than kind of having maybe a different perspective from the different kind of like characters from the kind of the series. There's a little bit, I maybe I'm wrong about this next thing, but I couldn't help but feel there's a little bit of like political commentary in this series. Like our bad guys are, they're kind of this they're kind of like gun nuts. They're kind of like we have this kind of makeshift kind of police force. They're all very much into kind of the law and everything like this. Very much into kind of like, you know, arming yourself. You can't help but think, and in America's kind of climate, they're thinly veiled kind of like substitutes for like the Republicans. Then we have this other group that are all this kind of like religious kind of zealots, but they kind of are secretly kind of, you know, doing all sorts of bad things and stuff. It's like, this is not too subtle, I don't think, in regards to who these kind of type of kind of characters are really kind of representing. So, you know, we have our Agent Stone as our kind of our main bad guy. He's quite a fun character, to be honest, but yeah, I couldn't help but think maybe this is a little bit of like thinly veiled kind of like political commentary that this kind of show does. And then it is kind of supposed to be about these kind of vehicle combat, and there is precious little of it, really. We get the final episode, you get probably the biggest kind of fight in regarding vehicles, and there's a little bit in the first episode, and there's smattering here and there, but not as much as you would expect. It is actually much more like fist fights and things. So I feel they've maybe strayed from the kind of the concept once or twice. You know, maybe a little bit more than they probably fans would have liked. And finally, like I've mentioned, the tone of this is very juvenile. I think people will think this is maybe silly. I think some people will love it. Some people will like the kind of the flashy visuals. They'll like the quick talking characters. They'll like the kind of like the little kind of like references and things like that. But it's precious little world building. It's precious little character building. And it really has very much kind of surface level sort of character depth in all of our kind of our characters and things like that. Even Anthony Mackie and Stephanie Beatrice, they attempt to kind of flesh them out. There's certain aspects of this show that I feel could have been done better. I'll be honest with you, when I was watching this show, I was kind of thinking about 5 out of 10. But I do feel the last episode does pick it up. There are a couple of episodes. There's actually one episode which has no action. I actually think it was probably the best one, to be honest. So it's gone up a little bit for me, but it's a 6 out of 10 for me. But it's only just a 6 out of 10. I mean, like I said, I don't think this was the best use of the IP. It's kind of flashy. It's fun. It's juvenile, but there's no real depth in it, and I feel there could have been better opportunities taken with it. 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.